What's your roommate horror story? College roommate put eggs on to boil for lunch, packed for spring break, and then she left, with the eggs still boiling on the stove. Luckily another roommate came back in between classes and saw it with maybe half an inch of water left in the pan. He didn't normally come home at that time too, so we were really lucky she didn't burn the place down. The bad roommate also got like 3 guinea pigs, against housing rules, and then stayed with her boyfriend 90% of the time. She'd come by to feed them but was pretty much never home, and they lived under her bed because she wasn't supposed to have them. What a terrible life. She was rich, spoiled and helpless, the type who could break something and easily replace it with no thought, so when she damaged something of yours it was no big deal because she assumed everyone could easily replace anything. Don't miss her one bit. I'm a teacher, and, when I had to teach from home last year, my roommate decided to invite a hookup over. My roommate knew I was working and knew I was going out of town for the weekend in less than 2 hours. Rather than wait, he and his hookup decided to bang so loudly that I could hear them over my soundproofing headphones. Mind you, I was working one-on-one with a student on Zoom whose mom was helping out in the background. They both very likely could have heard what was going on. I quickly muted myself with no explanation to the student, ran from the office, and pounded on the door to have them quiet down. All he did was turn music on to try to cover the noise. Didn't help. I could have been fired had my student/the mom heard what was going on so fast that I wouldn't have been able to get another job working with students ever again. Had a friend of a friend I never met, bad idea I know, become our third roommate in college. We were all 21-22. About the third weekend, I come home to my parents in my place trying to give me an intervention for a drinking problem. Sure, I, legally, 21 in US at this point, would grab a 6-pack with my groceries each week and have one occasionally with my other roommate or friends over, but for the average college kid, I was not a big drinker. Between work and engineering classes, didn't have much time for it. Didn't realize third roommate was a religious nut, called her parents and said I was a raging alcoholic who needed help. They contacted my parents, and that's how I ended up in a very confused and unnecessary, even if well-intended, intervention. In the midst of this, her parents came over, broke the lease, started moving her out while she's crying and saying she's scared of me and for my soul. There was a special satisfaction in the look on her parents' face when I sweetly reminded her to grab her condoms hidden in the bathroom for when her virgin boyfriend stayed over. Fuck you, Cheryl, and spare me your pearl clutching. After college I was rooming with another guy who was in my program when we were still in university. He'd had some health problems due to a congenital heart defect. He passed out one day while driving and crashed into a telephone pole. His doctor revoked his driver's license for 6 months. I was helping him out by running errands and taking him to appointments, etc. I didn't mind a bit. One evening when I got home, he told me we needed to talk. I was like, sure, what's up? He then informed me that he was going to swallow a bottle of pills later that night in his room and that I was not to open the door. I was to wait until the next day and then call the police. Obviously being gobsmacked, I told him I needed to take a walk to process the information. I immediately called the police while I was out of the apartment. I waited, and when I got back, they were already there and my roommate was loaded into an ambulance on his way to a psychiatric evaluation. I was worried that he'd be ticked at me for calling the cops. The police told me that I wasn't the only person who had called them. The roommate had told several other friends about his plans too, and they also called the police. It was clearly a cry for help. I moved out after that, but when I ran into the guy a few years later he was doing really good. It worked out okay. I worked at a resort for 2 years where a lot of the staff lived on site in dorms because of the location. For about 6 months I had a German couple? Brother and sister? I honestly don't know. They were the fucking weirdest, most disrespectful people I have ever met. They would leave passive-aggressive notes around if you, for example, left a single unwashed glass overnight. I wasn't dirty, but sometimes at 2 a.m. I don't want hand wash a glass I had drink out of. But then they thought it was okay to wash their clothes and hang them on every single piece of furniture they could find to dry. Or FaceTime their families back home at 3 a.m. and literally scream at the top of their lungs while doing so. They also did some weird shit like wearing matching onesies to bed every night. If one of them had to use the washroom, they both went in together. When getting ready for bed, he would hold out his toothbrush like a child and she would apply the toothpaste for him. I lived in a house with 4 other girls at the end of my undergrad degree. 2 were in their last year of nursing school and the other 3 of us were finishing other bachelor's degrees. In her last semester one of the nursing students turned into a passive-aggressive, holier-than-thou nightmare. You see, Her clinical rotations sometimes had her working 3 or 4 12-hour shifts a week, and she'd complain about it constantly. As in, it was almost the only thing she'd talk about. God forbid you mention that that's a pretty typical schedule for a nurse at a hospital and exactly what she was signing up to do for her career. It was so bad even her mom told her to stop whining. I overheard a phone conversation. She'd get home at 7:30 or 8 on those days and immediately start complaining about how she had to get to bed soon, and the rest of us couldn't possibly understand how hard life was for her, even the other nursing student who was doing the same thing. The 3 of us non-nursing students had all graduated a semester early and spent the next several months working jobs while applying/waiting for acceptance for graduate programs, and she used the fact that we weren't in school anymore as an excuse to treat us like a bunch of lazy bums. She'd make passive-aggressive or sometimes just openly rude comments about how those of us who weren't in nursing school weren't doing enough around the house. I specifically remember one night she came in, closed the front door, and said, "Wow, the kitchen's actually clean tonight," when she couldn't even see all of it from where she was standing. That especially pissed me off because it was always clean when it wasn't actively being used. Dirty dishes were never in the sink beyond the day they were used, and the counters always got wiped down by whoever cooked last. There was no need for that comment other than antagonizing. We were all very neat and tidy people. Her bad moods every night she came home from the hospital were so bad that we eventually just scattered to our individual rooms and shut the doors once we heard her car in the driveway. Even when she wasn't working long shifts she acted the same. The best times during this period were when I'd managed to go a few days in a row without seeing her. We'd been friends before this. The other nursing student tried to talk with her privately about her behavior. We figured she'd never accept it coming from one of the lazy bums, but it made no difference. She never apologized for anything. After she graduated and was getting ready to move out, she swung the opposite direction. The night before she moved out, she had a friend over and they stayed up almost all night making so much noise I had to get up and ask them to be quiet 2 or 3 times because I and the other remaining roommate had work in the morning. As much as she whined and complained and treated us like shit for the last several months, we'd never actually interfered with her ability to sleep. I've never been so happy to say goodbye to someone. I saw her one time after that at her wedding, and we haven't spoken since. I feel like that last semester and lack of apology was her showing her true colors. I can win this. I had a roommate in college who never left his room and always kept his door closed. He was nasty. Unsavory smells wafted from behind his door and he would always blow diarrhea all over the toilet and not clean it up. On a few occasions he would come out of his room in his underwear, while we were all having dinner together, go to the refrigerator, get a stick of butter, and take it back to his room. We didn't really want to know what he was doing with the butter, but turns out he was actually putting it on acorns and eating them, which is what was causing the blowout diarrhea. Oh, but the story isn't finished. Over Christmas break, he actually decided to drop out of college and join the army. Which makes sense. He left us a note that he wrote by cutting out letters from a magazine, like serial killers do, saying moving out, joining the army, left last rent payment in an Indiana Jones-style place. We found his last rent check sometime next year when we were taking down the Christmas tree and it fell out of the tree. But the story still isn't finished. After he moved out we had to find a new roommate. Finally went in his room to assess the damage. The floor was stained with some sort of red smelly material. And there were turtle skeletons in his closet. We never really confirmed that he was killing the turtles, but it seems like a reasonable conclusion. We had to foot the bill for a massive cleanup project so our landlord wouldn't throw us out. This guy I met a year prior at a gothic rock concert showed up at our front door last year. My girlfriend and I lived together in an apartment building. When I walked out, there he was. I was going skating so I took him with. We got back and he asked to stay the night. To pay it forward as many had for us, we took him in that night. Well, it turns out he planned on staying as long as he could. One night turned into 2 months. He didn't pay for shit. He ate our food, used our electricity, bummed rides off of us, hogged our bathroom, etc. He even gave himself a shitty haircut with the trimmer I used on my pubes. The guy was legitimately paranoid, thinking everyone was out to get him. He was obsessed with talking shit about Nazis. It sort of became his persona. My girlfriend is really into philosophy and reads a lot of books on the subject, so we both became labeled as Nazis by him. We definitely aren't, not even close. One day while getting out of my car he lunged at me and slammed into me before taking off. I didn't have time to react as he quickly rode away on his skateboard. I should have told him to leave right then and there, but I didn't. He thought every girl was into him. If they looked in his direction he took it as a sign they had the hots for his scrawny ass. He even thought the Nazis in his hometown were gay for him. In public he thought people were secretly saying things for him to hear when in reality it was just other people talking to other people. Seriously. My girlfriend eventually kicked him out. Thank goodness he didn't attack her, but he did accuse her of slashing his tires a month or two before she even knew who he was. We changed our locks that night. He started telling my group of friends that my girlfriend and I are Nazis. Of course he did. A month or two later my friends texted me saying he randomly showed up on their front porch waiting for them to come home so he could hang out. They had no idea who he was and quickly told him off. An hour later they found him sitting in his car nearby screaming about how the FBI is after him. Fast forward to this summer when my friends alert me that he showed back up at a club in the city. He apparently randomly assaulted someone, either punching or hitting with a skateboard, because he assumed the person was a Nazi. That ex-roommate is now banned from clubs and venues in the city, which is great. I would love it if he finally packed his stuff and left. There was a huge commotion about him online a few times. People were warning others to stay away if they see him. It was easy to see he's unstable and I hope he gets the mental health help he desperately needs before he harms anyone else. We lived in a place with paper-thin walls. She was often cold, likely from refusing to wear more than a thong at a time, so she would use a hairdryer to warm up. At 4 a.m. The other girl had Disney movies blaring from the TV 24/7 to help her sleep. They also refused to clean. I could go into a lot of gross detail, but the worst was hairdryer girl, who would make tuna risotto, leave it out until it molded, put water in the pot to soak it, without first throwing out the spoiled fishy rice, and let that sit for like 3 more days. This happened more than once. She also constantly had people over for several days, making even more noise and hogging the kitchen. She would refuse to empty the washer after doing laundry or collect her clothes from the drying rack, so she had a giant pile of clothes in the communal space and would walk around naked to pick up 1 to 2 items from that once in a while. Freshman year of college, I had a roommate from hell. She started off normal enough, we were both nerdy and had similar enough quirks to not get in the way. Then after a few months, after she was comfortable, she turned into a monster. Drove away a few of our friends, made fun of speech impediment, constantly trashed my major and opinions, refused to let me close the windows in negative-degree weather, would never clean her side of the room and leave food everywhere, thus getting me in trouble with my parents when they came to visit. She once stepped on her glasses and blamed me, just all kinds of horrible stuff. And then it got worse. I finally had enough and tried to have a polite conversation and reassert boundaries, etc. She didn't like that. So she got worse, and I stopped being in the room except for when necessary. Then she blew up at me and said concerning things like I don't want to exist anymore. I hate life. I'm leaving and you won't ever see me again. I knew she had a past of depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, so I was obviously concerned. I found an RA, they had to call PubSafe and then eventually the police because she wasn't responding to any texts or calls and we couldn't find anywhere on the small campus. Eventually we got in contact with her and got stuff set up to help her. Except she then tried to kill me in my sleep and blamed me for literally everything, as well as doxed me online and blew up our online friend community. Oh, and she also had an explicit sexual relationship with a 14-year-old who lived across the country via Tumblr and fanfiction. TLDR, roommate tried to kill me in my sleep, made fun of my speech impediment, among other things. I moved to the Netherlands to study abroad and I couldn't find housing, so I stayed in a hostel that was full of other international students having the same trouble finding housing that I had. My roommate was a Bulgarian girl with strong body odor. I actually really liked her at first because she was quiet and always reading, and whenever she did talk, she would say something really funny. She would often laugh to herself, but I didn't mind that at first. I thought it was endearing. One day, a new female guest arrived at this hostel and my roommate told me that new girl was from her hometown and that they were arch enemies. She told me to follow her up to the room where she started blaring "Gonna Make You Sweat, Everybody Dance Now," so that nobody could hear us talking, and then proceeded to tell me that this woman had followed her from Bulgaria to the Netherlands to sabotage her academic career. That's when I began to realize that something was wrong with her. I will include the rest in the form of a list. She continued to tell me that new guests were people from her hometown who had followed her to the Netherlands to spy on her or pursue her romantically, even though she was clearly the only Bulgarian guest in the hostel. She claimed to be a student like me, but she never attended classes or had any homework. Not that it was any of my business, but I thought it was worth including. She told me that she was in an arranged marriage with a man that lived in Amsterdam and would travel to visit him on weekends. When she would come back, I would ask her how it went and she would tell me that she didn't see him because he was avoiding her. Her English wasn't great, so I couldn't figure out where she was staying on these weekend trips or why she continued to embark on them even though this guy seemed to want nothing to do with her. While I was studying, she would sit in a chair and watch me. Sometimes, she would get a knife and a cutting board and start chopping fruit. I could see in my peripheral vision that she was watching me as she chopped the fruit. She would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning on occasion and turn on the light and just sit on her bed laughing maniacally. Sometimes, I would get depressed. I felt really overwhelmed from being alone in a foreign country where I lived in a hostel. I would just lay in the fetal position in my bed and cry. My roommate would try to comfort me by kneeling on the floor next to my bed and reading an encyclopedia to me. It was sweet, but also bizarre. She would never use the internet or any device that connected to the internet. One time, I accidentally left my cell phone on her side of the room and went to sleep. When she came in the room, she aggressively woke me up and yelled, "What is this telephone?" instead of just putting it closer to me. I think she thought I was using it as some sort of recording device. She was constantly telling me how brilliant she was and going on about how she was so much better than all of her peers in Bulgaria who were, according to her, illiterate and poor. She would refer to them as illiterate lab sheep. She told me that I was taking her out for sushi to celebrate her birthday 2 days after her birthday. I told her I was super poor and I couldn't afford to do that and she stormed out of the room. Let my mother convince me to find roommates on Craigslist. Met with them for coffee before committing. They told me that they wanted to get cats and there was a 2 animal limit. I was fine with this, and told them to go for it. A few months later, my door stopped latching and the cats could easily push themselves in and started chewing on the blinds. I wrote a service request to the apartment and mentioned this in the notes. My landlord called me the next day saying that my roommates had not paid their pet deposit. He stated that the responsibility was on all 3 of us. My roommates were furious, saying that they told me they didn't plan to pay the pet deposits and that I was maliciously trying to get them kicked out. They called a roommate meeting. I invited my partner to come with for support. They yelled at both of us, telling us to shut the FCK up multiple times. I already rarely came home, opting to stay with my partner most of the time. They decided that this meant I didn't like them and I should have told them that I didn't expect to be best friends with them when I moved in. My partner started taking the rent check over for me. When I came to move my stuff out, they had taken the toilet paper out of the bathroom and put a note on the trash can that said for roommate names and guests only. Turns out they took the last few things I put in the trash back out and put it in my mini fridge. It was full of rotten food. To top it all off, they texted and said that they still needed the rent for August of that year. Our lease ended in July. They tried to refute this by saying that the lease couldn't have been 11 months, that's just weird. I double-checked my copy of the lease and talked to the landlord. Either they were too ignorant to read the lease or they were trying to screw me over. I never actually lived with this guy, but a guy I went to college with got kicked out of housing every year. Let's call him Donald. First time, I met him because he lived on my floor freshman year. Got kicked out for stealing his roommate's ID and used it to buy shit at the on-campus convenience store, technically identity theft. Second, the next year he got in a fist fight with his roommate. Third, year after that, my junior year, he knocked over a large hookah he was smoking inside and set a couch on fire. After that I don't think he was allowed to apply for on-campus housing again. I'm living with her right now. She's a nightmare. To give a short list, she's a trust fund rich kid who doesn't see the need to work and makes fun of me for having a job, which I need to survive. Constantly asks for money while simultaneously bragging about getting $300 a week from her parents in allowance. I have severe PTSD from a heavily abusive upbringing and have requirements she understood before moving in to be able to sleep and feel safe, mainly just that doors and windows in the common area need to be locked before bed and while we're asleep, I lock them so it's not like she has to do it. She'll unlock the front door late at night while I'm asleep and text me that she did it when I wake up, like by the way I unlocked the door at 1 a.m, no idea why she feels the need to do this and then tell me? She does not clean the kitchen or common area or her room or her bathroom. We don't share bathrooms, so I don't really care except that I'm tired of cleaning up her mess when she's done cooking every day because otherwise she'll leave it to mold. She used to not have dishes and would either steal mine or use styrofoam dishes that she'd then wash in the sink until they melted or molded and would leave the gunk in the sink. I dragged her to the thrift store and made her get real dishes after a few rounds of this. She trauma dumps on me every day regardless of how hard I set boundaries. I can walk through the door from class and she'll be like, "What's up, dude?" I just had a nightmare about the time I was violently raped, and will continue talking about it while I ignore her. I used to entertain her and try to help her feel better because I know how much PTSD dreams suck. but it destroyed my mental health and she doesn't listen if I tell her I don't have the energy to help her at the moment, and will talk at me while I'm actively asking her to stop. She seemed to use to believe clothes are optional in the house. It was never discussed, but I believe that you should wear clothes in the house was common sense. I once asked her to wear clothes and she put on lingerie and said she was doing what I asked. She claims to have DID, but only to excuse when she violates my boundaries and to avoid me holding her accountable. Why are you telling me off for stealing your clothes? You know I have DID. It was my kleptomanic alter. I'm studying psychology specializing in these disorders. I don't care to diagnose or undiagnose her, but I know that even if she does, she could communicate to that alter to cut it out. She sexually harasses me daily and tries to convince me to sleep with her frequently. I'm married, a gay man, and she's engaged. I want to kick her out over this and get a restraining order, but we're locked in a lease. She's homophobic, and makes fun of me for being gay, but claims she's not homophobic because her fiancé is bi. She's racist towards my husband. She steals the love letters my husband sends to me while he's away for work that I kept in a box. She stole my engagement ring. She has a cat she never plays with and neglects. I try to play with and care for her cat, but the cat has been so neglected it's terrified of being around people half the time. It's barely even tame, like it's never been handled, and she's had it for years. We're college students, and she's never gone to class once this semester. My life is a living hell right now. We were close friends before. I couldn't even fathom that she would be like this until I started living with her. I cannot wait for our lease to break so I never have to see her again. In college, I lived in a house with 5 people, including one woman who was so lonely and bored that she would spend all week monitoring my weekly chore chart responsibilities because I came before her on the chart. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes reminding me not to forget to clean a certain area. After each week, she would evaluate how I did and ensure I did it all. This is how I, and only ever I, had to dust the top of the fridge or deep clean nooks and crannies no one else had to. No one but her had these crazy standards of cleanliness. It was all her. Her rationale was because she had higher standards. Why should she have to do more work because I didn't do a good enough job? Again, she is referring to dust on top of a fridge. When I expressed how unfair this was to the other roommates, they shrugged and said it sucked but wasn't their problem. It's what I got for coming before her on the chore wheel, and no one else wants to be stuck there. Fuck you, Natasha. Told this one in another post and will probably be buried, but hey. It's therapeutic letting it all out. Nice roommate was moving out. It was an off time for rentals. We were having trouble finding someone on Craigslist. Then a woman responded, and since we were desperate, I said to just give it to her. I texted her, asking when she'd be moving in and never got an answer. A few days later, after roommate moved out, I'm in bed and I hear the front door open. It's this new woman, who never told me when I should expect her. She and her friend moved a mountain of stuff into the living room and a slightly smaller mountain of stuff into her bedroom. She didn't bother putting any of it away for about a month until I mentioned my mom would be visiting. I only lived with her for 2 months and it was sheer hell. She was about my mom's age and reeked of stale urine. Like I'd get the dry heaves just walking through the living room. I tried spraying air freshener but she complained when I did, so I just stayed holed up in my room with the door closed. I nicely let her borrow a blanket and it smelled so bad after I took it to be dry cleaned and the guy there asked if someone peed on it. What else? She turned the living room into her own personal office and would play church music loudly all day starting early in the morning when I was still asleep. I came home from work one night and found our front door unlocked with her inside. I asked why the door was unlocked and she said I'm afraid of locking myself out. I angrily told her our door needs to always be locked because for fuck's sake, we live in a city. Took me telling her this several times before she finally did it. She also helped herself to my stash of tea bags without asking. I hid them in my closet after that. I also found crumbs in the bathroom and learned she was eating in there. When I confronted her about this, she laughed at me. She had to fill out an application with building management to be added to the lease and never did. When I asked her to, all she said was I don't have a printer. She worked at a local university, so I don't get why she couldn't print it there. She paid her first month's rent and utilities and then just stopped. She was always full of excuses. The one she usually gave was she just spent hundreds renewing her passport, she couldn't afford it. Then she outright refused to pay, saying the apartment was unsafe because there wasn't enough windows. We were technically a basement unit. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to get her evicted but it didn't work. Thankfully, the building management company was very helpful and let me break the lease and leave. She stuck around, I guess basically squatting because she wouldn't pay, and they eventually did evict her. I'm never using Craigslist to find a roommate again. I always look for the good in people, and figure if they have issues I will stay their friend and help them. I used to always see the good in people and not believe they could be shits. My parents told me not to be roommates, but fuck that, what do parents know/s? Yeah, so we were roommates. I had a boyfriend, now husband 30 years strong, and she apparently hated me for that. She would make a point of going out and bringing basically a train back to our apartment. By that I mean a bunch of guys to fuck. Not fun, they'd think I was in on it and no. I couldn't tell my parents, pride goeth before the fall, I know, so I slept with my door locked and push a small bookcase in front of it. Locked my door when I wasn't there. Would have to be fully dressed when I left my room cause I never knew who was there. She was such a whore. STDs so many times, always eating my food, asking for money. She got cancer and I took care of her for 6 months, paid rent and didn't charge her. She got pissed at me and made up lies about me to my friends. I brought her into my friend circle, thinking that maybe having stable people around would be helpful. Nope. Oh, initially she'd gotten me hooked on cocaine as I could afford a couple 8 balls a week, but after a few months, thankfully, I realized how much money was going up my nose and stopped buying. That's when the real crazy came out and she trash talked me to my friends, destroyed my sofa, comfy chair, TV and a few other things. I finally said something to my parents. I thought I could handle it. I'm so glad I finally told them what was going on, except for the brief fling with coke, as they paid to break my lease and moved me home. They didn't make a big deal out of it other than to tell me I could always come to them and they would help me and not say anything. It's been 32 years. I looked that bitch up on Facebook the other day and I have to say I have the last laugh. We're both the same age, 57. I think I look pretty damn good for my age. Good skin, nice hair, not fat but not thin, just average. She looks like she's been rode hard and put up wet. Bad skin, shitty hair, looks like a druggie to be honest. Yes, I'm petty. I had signed a lease with a girl in our friend group. My friend group called me one night to say I need out because she turned batshit on them. It was too late to back out. She was constantly cheating on her boyfriend and had an alcohol problem. Her BF moved in with us which I did not want. He would block my truck in the driveway so I couldn't get out for class, work, see my horse. Refused to move it. Used condoms would be left everywhere. I just stuck to my room essentially when I was home. The worst was that they would get hammered and violent, break everything so I kept my microwave, coffee maker, anything to my name in my room. One night before things got really bad, the girl was trying to drive drunk to cheat while he was out so I calmly took her keys, told her it was not safe. Friend or not I couldn't let her drive as she was stumbling everywhere. She threw plates and shoes at me, broke most of my plates. The BF was just as bad. One night I had to have a guy friend pick me up. BF was hammered beating on my door trying to get in to beat me for no reason. I had been home and quiet in my room, telling me I'm a piece of shit and should kill myself. The kicker is he was drunkenly screaming at me that my truck was a piece of shit. It was a really nice Avalanche so WTF, and that my maple syrup was shit. I had organic syrup in my kitchen cubby. I regret not speaking to my landlord. I was so terrified of their violent behavior that I froze. How could I afford to live somewhere else if I can't get out of the lease and would that escalate things? I was quiet, clean, didn't have guests over, didn't interact with them once things started getting bad, and I would stay with friends when I could. One night I was so scared of them and needed to eat that I got delivery and had a basket out of my window. To this day I can't wrap my head around their behavior. The worst thing I ever did as a roommate was watch a lost cat for one night in my room after finding the owner to pick it up the next day. British University, so I had a room to myself but shared a kitchen with 10 other people. Some were good, but quite a few were horribly messy. One guy left his dirty pan on the hob before going home for the weekend, and there was always this really manky football just in the kitchen. I had to learn how to cook with one burner, about 2 square inches of fridge space, and about 3 square inches of counter space. I think the standout was when my mom brought me back after the Christmas holidays with a load of fresh vegetables because she wanted to make sure I was eating properly. I was trying to tell her that there was no way to fit all of those vegetables into that fridge, but she didn't really take it in until she opened it herself, saw it piled high with stale food, and went Jesus Christ. She took all the vegetables back with her. Oh yes, and there was that time the girl in the room next to me brought a bunch of friends back to her room at 6 a.m., and I heard one of them yell "WHO lives in that room next to you? We should just run an LOL." I just leapt out of bed and made sure that door was firmly locked. Had a sweet mate in college who shared a bathroom with me and my roommate. This girl would lock us out of the bathroom and call us dirty people because we kept our toiletries in the cabinet instead of our rooms. She got mad one day and took the blinds from her room and put them in the tub before dumping bleach on them directly and leaving for the night. She said they were dusty. She lived by herself but had a roommate at first. Crazy chick would steal her roommate's bras and underwear and hide them under her bed. One day she put bleach in the roommate's shampoo but the RA and cops said they couldn't do anything about it or totally prove it, so the roommate moved out to another floor. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos and would like to see more, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. And don't forget to hit the bell to get notified every time I upload. I am the Reddit Onion, and I'll see you next time.